In 1976, National Geographic published a remarkable map titled Peoples of the Soviet Union, offering a vivid snapshot of the USSR's vast ethnic diversity. This map showcased 107 ethnic groups who spoke 11 language families in total. It also featured beautiful poetic descriptions of 24 randomly selected ethnic groups across the country. In the 1970s, the Cold War was at its peak and the Western world had limited knowledge of the internal dynamics of the USSR. This map served as an educational tool for understanding the complex ethnic makeup of the country. The Soviet Union's complex tapestry of peoples was forged through centuries of expansion and upheaval. Beginning as a small Muscovite principality in the 15th century, Russia grew into a vast empire by absorbing the neighboring territories. First the Finnic and Turkic Volga regions, then Siberia's nomadic tribes, followed by Ukraine, Belarus and the Baltics in the 17th and 18th centuries, and finally the Caucasus and Central Asia in the 1800s. The 1917 revolution transformed this empire into the USSR, which later forcibly incorporated independent states like Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania during World War II. By the late Soviet period, two competing trends emerged. While urbanization and state policies promoted cultural homogenization, some ethnic groups simultaneously experienced cultural revivals. This tension between Soviet unity and national diversity remained unsolved, with smaller groups particularly vulnerable to assimilation, even as the state nominally celebrated ethnic differences. This legacy of imperial expansion continued to shape USSR's demographic and cultural landscape until its collapse. Now grab your tea, coffee or vodka and let's take a trip back in time to shed light on the cultural fabric of this superpower. Well, going through each of these groups in detail would take hours, so I thought we could stick to the grouping of these ethnicities as it's shown here. The ethno-linguistic groups of the USSR are divided into Mongolic, Tungusic, Turkic, Caucasian, Eskimo-Aleut, Baltic, Iranic, Romance, Slavic, other Indo-European, Paleo-Siberian and Uralic. In addition, 5 additional ethnic groups are shown as others. One thing we have to touch upon is the confusing use of the yellow color code. You'll see that Ukrainians are shown here in yellow, however the sparsely populated lands of the USSR are shown in a very similar yellow hue, which makes it look like all these parts of the country were inhabited by Ukrainians. Another similar tone of yellow is used to show the areas inhabited by Tungusic people, however since they don't cover a vast territory, it shouldn't be too confusing. Also, it is worth mentioning that the closest population census to 1976 was conducted in 1979. So in this video, when I talk about ethnic groups, I'll be using data from that census. Alright, let's start with the descendants of the glorious masters of the Great Steppe, the Mongols. In the USSR, the two Mongolic groups shown on this map are the Buryat and Kalmyk peoples. The Buryats primarily lived on the southeastern borders of the country, right above Mongolia. Back then, their population was 352,000. They spoke the Buryat language, which is pretty close to the standard Khalkha-Mongolian spoken in Mongolia today. In the 13th century, at the height of the Mongol Empire, they were referred to as the forest people inhabiting the northern areas of the Mongolian heartland. Today, the Buryats share a culture closely resembling that of the Mongols, with many practicing nomadic pastoralism, residing in yurts and adhering to Buddhism. As the map describes, Buddhists in the east, shamanists in the west, the Buryats once spent their lives in hunting and cattle herding. Now with changes wrought by collective farming and industry, few remember how the distilled vodka, like Tarasun, once drunk with so much ceremony in mountain encampments. But one thing remains unchanged, the love of learning bequeathed by the lamas. Buryats have achieved a high level of education that helps equip many for work in regional industries such as aircraft manufacture. And now we go to the west of northern Caucasus. Here we see the Kalmyk people, who are commonly seen as the only Mongolic and Buddhist group in Europe. Well, of course that depends on your definition of Europe, since many people have different perceptions of the continent's eastern borders. Kalmyk people speak the Kalmyk language, which belongs to the Mongolic language family. A fascinating fact about Kalmyk is that it inspired the creation of the Evokese language in the Star Wars universe. The story goes that the sound designer for Return of the Jedi heard Kalmyk in a documentary and was intrigued by the sound. He then chose to base the Evokese language on Kalmyk, giving it a unique and authentic feel. The Kalmyk population was recorded at 146,000. Today, Buddhism is still very strong here, and you can see many Buddhist temples and monasteries in these lands. Although some of them were abandoned or destroyed during the Soviet era, Kalmyk heritage is still quite well preserved in Russia's Kalmykia region. We're hitting the Far East now and meeting the Tungusic people. Unfortunately, the tone of yellow used for them blends into the background, so it might be a little hard for you to discern the Tungusic spots. The Tungusic people are indigenous groups primarily living in Siberia and northeastern China with historical origins between Lake Baikal and the Amur River. Evidence indicates their ancestors were early inhabitants of the Siberian taiga. Over time, they migrated across Siberia, Manchuria, and Mongolia, adapting to harsh climates. Traditionally, they were semi-nomadic hunters, fishers, and gatherers, living in small mobile communities that relied on the natural resources of the Siberian taiga and Manchurian forests. Let's start with the Evenk people, who are the largest Tungusic group in Siberia. As you can see, they are spread over an enormous area. Today in Russia, after the Russians, the Evenks are the second ethnic group that covers the largest land area in the country. But why is that? The key is their use of reindeer. While many indigenous Siberian groups relied on reindeer for meat, milk, and transportation, the Evenks took it a step further by learning how to ride them. This skill allowed them to explore the expansive, uncharted lands of Siberia, enabling their spread across a large area despite their small population. In 1979, the Evenk population in the USSR was around 27,000. In addition, we see some other smaller Tungusic peoples in these lands. Evan 12,000, Nanay 10,000, Negidal 500, Orosh 1200, Udege 1500, and Ulsh 2500. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to find population data for the Orok people. And now we've reached the hard part, the Turkic people, because there were so many Turkic people in the USSR. Well, my friends, I won't cover each Turkic group in detail. In fact, for Turkic, Mongolic, and Tungusic peoples and languages, I've created separate videos covering them in more depth. To watch all three combined, you can also check out my 2-hour-long I'll Take Languages video. Let's go over the Turkic people by region. In the Caucasus, we see Azerbaijani, Karachay, Balkar, Nogay, Kumuk, and Meskhetian Turkish people. With a population of 5.4 million, the Azerbaijanis were the most numerous Turkic group in this region. If we go northwest towards Ukraine and Moldova, we find the Gagauz and Karaim peoples, both fascinating Turkic groups. The Gagauz speak the Gagauz language, which is closely related to Turkish. They are predominantly Orthodox Christians, setting them apart from most other Turkic peoples. Their origins are debated, with theories linking them to medieval Oghuz Turks, Kumans or Pechenegs who settled in the region and adopted Christianity. The Gagauz population back then was around 173,000. Karaim people, also known as Karaites, are a group of Crimean Tatars. They are one of the few Turkic groups that follow Judaism. In 1979, 3,300 Karaims were recorded in the USSR. The form of Judaism they follow is called Karaite Judaism. The main difference between Karaite and mainstream Rabbinic Judaism is that the Karaites recognize only the written Torah as the supreme authority, not the oral law. When we move a little east, we see the Tatar, Kazakh, Chuvash, and Bashkir groups. To the south, we find other groups such as the Kyrgyz, Turkmen, Uyghur, Uzbek, and Karakalpak. Here, it is worth mentioning that with a population of 12.4 million, the Uzbeks were by far the most populous Turkic group in the USSR. In general, after the Russians and Ukrainians, they were the third largest ethnic group in the country in 1979. The more east we go, the more we see much smaller Turkic groups in terms of population: Shor, Hakas, Altay, Tuvan, and Tofa. Generally, these have been much more vulnerable. They all speak Turkic languages named after them, and today almost all of them are endangered. To the north, we see the Dolgan people. They speak Dolgan, which is the northernmost spoken Turkic language. And when we go further east, we find the Yakut people, who inhabit quite a large area. They speak the Yakut language, the easternmost Turkic language of the USSR. In addition to their main hub, we see many small pockets of Yakut settlements. Wow, that was a lot. We are done with the Turkic folks. After the Slavic people in the USSR, the Turkic people had the largest population and covered the second largest landmass in the country. Before we continue, I want to share one of the beautiful poetic descriptions of the Turkic people that National Geographic came up with. The Azerbaijani people were mentioned as tuning coveted radios to local disc jockeys. Azerbaijanis in Turkish-style coffee houses listen to the haunting tones of the Middle Eastern music. Though still influenced by Persian culture, the family-oriented Turkic-speaking Azerbaijanis learn new ways through universal education. Women, previously restricted by Muslim custom, play a growing role in their nation's economy. Many Azerbaijanis farm cotton, others work in the extensive oil and gas fields. The Republic's institutes and academies have trained highly qualified petroleum scientists and technicians. Now we're heading back to one of the most ethno-linguistically complex regions in the world, the beautiful Caucasus. This region alone hosts such an incredible diversity of ethnic groups and languages. Here we mainly see Northeast Caucasian groups such as the Avar, Agul, Dargin, Chechen, Ingush, Lak, Lezgin, Rutul, Tabasaran, Udi and Sakur peoples, all of whom speak their ancestral languages named after them. The most populous among them were Chechens with 755,000, Avars with 482,000, and Lezgins with 382,000 people. For centuries, the northeastern Caucasian peoples have lived in the mountains, where their villages were built around strong family and clan ties. These clans were led by elders and followed traditions of self-rule, hospitality, and bravery. Due to their location, they were often attacked by powerful empires like the Persians, Ottomans, and Russians. However, they knew the land well and worked together to fight back, especially during the long wars against Russian expansion in the 19th century. Even with outside pressures, they kept their languages, traditions, and way of life. Islam became an important part of their culture, shaping their laws, social life, and daily customs. And now we go to Georgia. As you can see, with a population of 3.5 million, the Georgians are the dominant people here and the only Kartvelian group shown on this map. Lovers of wine, spicy food and song, Georgians are known throughout the Soviet Union for their open-handed hospitality. Among the best educated of the Soviet peoples, they have long been noted for intellectual curiosity and literary tradition. The Knight in the Panther Skin, a romantic epic written by poet Shota Rustaveli in the 12th century, is still greatly loved by Georgians and esteemed around the world. Famed for longevity, at least one in every 2,500 Georgians is 100 years old or more. Although industrial workers have greatly increased in the past 50 years, mainly in manganese mining and food processing, about a third of Georgians are still employed in agriculture. Here we also see the northwestern Caucasian peoples, including the Abazas, Adiges, Circassians, Kabardians, and Abkhazians. However, it is important to note that their largest populations today are found in Turkey. With that being said, we're now going to the opposite edge of the country to focus more on the forgotten people of the Arctic. This area, mostly consisting of sparsely inhabited or uninhabited lands, is home to small indigenous groups from the Eskimo Aleut and Paleo-Siberian branches. We see many small pockets of isolated settlements where these groups have lived. The Eskimo Aleut people are located on the easternmost coast and islands. While the majority of the Eskimo Aleut population lived in North America and Greenland, their population in the 1979 USSR census was marked at just over 2,000. The Paleo-Siberian presence was much stronger here. Compared to the small Eskimo Aleut population, 28,500 Paleo-Siberian people were recorded. Chukchi were numbered at 14,000, Itelmen at 1,300, Ket at 1,100, Koryak at 7,800, Nivk at 4,300, and Yukagir at 835. The Eskimo Aleut peoples, including the Inuit, Yupik and Aleut, are indigenous to Arctic regions from eastern Siberia to Greenland. Their ancestors migrated from Siberia thousands of years ago, adapting to extreme conditions through hunting, fishing, and gathering. Their languages belong to the Eskimo Aleut family. The Paleo-Siberian groups have ancient roots in Siberia, predating many other populations. They traditionally relied on reindeer herding, fishing, and hunting, adapted to their diverse environments. Their languages, which include several isolates and small families, are unrelated to each other. It is worth mentioning that they were among the last indigenous people in Siberia to be subdued by the Russians due to their fierce resistance. Chukchi tribesmen murmur as they watch the moon haze over in the bitter Siberian night. Numbering a mere 13,000, they were dispersed among shoreline villages and the tundra. On their reindeer farms, Chukchis tend 10 to 20,000 head. Chukchi herdsmen count their antlered charges in groups of 20, the total of a man's fingers and toes. Their word for man also means 20. And again, we're hopping to the opposite edge of the country to explore the beautiful Baltics. Here we see two Baltic groups, Lithuanians and Latvians, with populations of 2.8 million and 1.4 million respectively. I would also like to note that just over the northern border of the Kazakh Socialist Republic, we can see small pockets of Latvian communities. Sailors from this Baltic Republic helped man the Soviet Union's deep-sea fishing fleet far from Latvia's forested plains. Members of the Hanseatic Trade League in the 12th century, mainly Lutheran in religious background, Latvians have long been oriented to the West. Independent from 1918 to 1940, they celebrate their nation's wealth of folk music in summer festivals at Riga, the capital. Skilled workers, Latvians take great pride in their electronics and metal industries and in the quality of their healthcare and housing. Sword-swinging Lithuanians swept from the north across Eastern Europe in the 13th and 14th centuries and established a feudal kingdom from the Baltic to the Black Sea. Once politically and culturally linked to Poland, the Lithuanians were subjects of the Russian Tsar by 1795. They re-established an independent state from 1918 to 1940 when they came under Soviet domination. Staunchly Roman Catholic, Lithuanians remained a largely agricultural people, though the Republic has also developed flourishing industries. Since Roman times, Lithuania's shores have been known for their fruit and their precious amber. Such beautiful descriptions. In today's times, the world is one big global village and many of us have certain knowledge about the post-Soviet countries and the ethnic groups in this video. But can you imagine how marvelous these descriptions must have been for someone seeing this map in 1976? Imagine living in a divided world in the Cold War era, not having any idea about the people of the USSR, and reading these lines. Truly magical. It's time to explore the Iranic people. Yes, there were other Iranic groups besides the Tajiks in the USSR. When we head south, we see a strong Tajik presence in the Tajik Soviet Socialist Republic, as expected, because where else would the Tajiks live, right? Anyway, around the Tajiks, we also see a few small pockets of Persian presence. To see the rest of the Iranic groups such as the Kurds, Ossetians, Talysh and Tats, we return to the Caucasus. In the Armenian and Azerbaijani Soviet Socialist Republics, we see a large Kurdish diaspora with 115,000 people. In the Northern Caucasus, we find the Ossetian people with a population of 541,000. Descended from the medieval Iranic nomadic tribe known as the Alans, the Ossetian culture blends Caucasian and Iranian traditions with a strong focus on warrior customs, music and dance. In Azerbaijan, we see two other Iranic groups, the Talysh and Tat. Talysh culture is a blend of Persian, Caucasian and Turkic influences with strong traditions in music, dance and folk arts. The Talysh language is an Iranic language closely related to Persian, though it has distinct features and is spoken by a significant number of people both in Azerbaijan and Iran. Interestingly, in the 1979 census, the Talysh were actually recognized as Azerbaijanis, so we don't have official numbers regarding their population. In northern Azerbaijan, we also see the Tat people, whose population was 22,400. Culturally, they share many traditions with their Azerbaijani neighbors, including aspects of cuisine, clothing and music, while also preserving certain unique customs reflecting their Iranian heritage. The Tat people speak the Tat language from the Iranic family, although it is much more endangered compared to Talysh. Across the whole USSR, there were only two main Romance groups, Moldovians and Romanians. In case you didn't know, because some people don't, Romanian and Moldovan are Romance languages. This means they belong to the same language family as Spanish, French, Italian and Portuguese. Please avoid the mistake of categorizing Romanian and Moldovan as Slavic languages, because they're not. As Romania was not part of the USSR but Moldova was, naturally the Moldovan population was much higher, around 3 million, while the Romanian population was around 128,000. In addition to Moldova, we also see a few Moldovan majority spots in western Ukraine. However, Romanians mostly lived along the easternmost borders of the USSR. And now the Slavic groups. Well, my friends, we start with the Russians, who, as you might guess, were the largest ethnic group in the USSR. They are shown in orange on this map. The population of the USSR in 1979 was 262 million, 137 million of whom were Russians. That's just over half of the entire population. As the map describes, with the indomitability characteristic of the Slavic peoples, the Russians fought off invaders through the centuries and built their state into one of the world's greatest empires. Under the Tsars, they ranged from the Baltic Sea to the Pacific, and their culture enriched by the Eastern Orthodox faith and Western intellectual ideas. Their character was indelibly engraved by artists such as Tolstoy, Pushkin and Tchaikovsky. With the Soviet system and the growth of an industrialized society, religious influence has waned. Russians, who make up just over half the Soviet Union's population, today can be found throughout the nation. Bureaucrats, agriculturalists, factory workers, educators, technicians. Ukrainians are shown in yellow, again almost the same color used to mark sparsely populated areas. So, in addition to the Ukrainian Socialist Republic, they also inhabited many small pockets in the Kazakh Socialist Republic and the southern parts of the USSR. Most Ukrainians we see here were forcibly resettled to Kazakhstan as part of the Soviet Union's collectivization and industrialization campaigns. The Ukrainian population back then was 42.3 million, making them the second largest ethnic group in the USSR after the Russians. Today, there is still a significant Ukrainian population in Kazakhstan. In case you haven't seen, I recently posted a video exploring modern-day Kazakhstan's ethnic groups and languages. I highly recommend it. The other Slavic groups we see on this map are Belarusians, Bulgarians, Czechs, Poles and Slovaks, whose populations were respectively 9.4 million, 360,000, 17,000, 1.1 million and 9,400. Belarusians had a large population, most of whom lived in the Belarusian Socialist Republic. The other groups had smaller populations, but why were there so many Poles in the USSR? Most Poles in the USSR trace their history to forced migrations during the Russian Empire and Soviet periods. Many were exiled after the Polish uprisings in the 19th century and later deported during Stalin's collectivization and purges in the 1930s, especially from western Ukraine and Belarus. We see a strong Polish presence in northern Kazakhstan, Belarus, Lithuania and Ukraine. The other Indo-European category mentioned on this map includes the Albanian, Armenian, German, Greek, Romani and Jewish people. But aren't Jewish people a Semitic group? Perhaps the map refers specifically to Ashkenazi Jews, who are a distinct Jewish diaspora group that emerged in Central Europe. This might be the reason why they were categorized as Indo-European here. Anyway, let's continue. The Armenians were the largest group among those mentioned, mostly inhabiting the Caucasus region, with a population of just over 4.1 million. The Albanian population in the USSR was very small, just over 4,000 people, mostly living in southern Moldova. The Romani population was around 200,000 but was scattered across different parts of the western USSR, mainly in Moldova and Ukraine. Especially in northern Kazakhstan and across the southern borders of modern-day Russia, we see many small German communities. Perhaps along with the Koreans, whom we will cover soon, Germans were one of the most interesting minorities in the Soviet Union. It started in the 1700s when Russian Empress Catherine the Great invited Europeans, especially Germans, to move to Russia. She promised them land, no taxes, and the freedom to practice their religion. Many Germans settled near the Volga River, creating the Volga German community. Later in the 1800s, some of these Germans moved to Kazakhstan as Russia expanded into its southern territories. In the 1930s, Stalin's harsh farming policies devastated the Volga Germans, and many were relocated to Kazakhstan and Siberia. Then in 1941, when Nazi Germany attacked the USSR, Stalin feared that the remaining Volga Germans might help the enemy. Around 400,000 were forcibly deported to Kazakhstan in terrible conditions. Many didn't survive the trip and died later from hunger, sickness and cold. I was actually quite surprised to see that the German population in the USSR was recorded at 1.9 million in 1979, 900,000 of whom reportedly lived in the Kazakh Socialist Republic. Even today, in modern-day Kazakhstan, a little more than 226,000 Germans live, 106,000 of whom still speak German. It is fascinating to see such a rooted German community this far from their original homeland. Greeks in the USSR primarily lived in Ukraine and Kazakhstan. Their population was 343,000. The Greek presence in this region spans over 2 millennia, beginning with ancient colonies along the northern coast of the Black Sea. In the late 18th century, after the Russo-Turkish War, Catherine the Great invited Greeks from the Ottoman Empire to settle in newly acquired Russian territories, leading to the founding of cities like Mariupol. The Jews in the USSR numbered 1.8 million. This population comprised various unique groups, including the Georgian Jews, Mountain Jews, and Central Asian Jews. Most Soviet Jews lived in Ukraine, Russia, Belarus, Moldova, and the Baltic states. Not many know this, but there was also a considerable Jewish presence in the Soviet Far East, in the Jewish Autonomous Oblast. In 1928, the Soviet Union launched a project to establish a Jewish autonomous region for cultural independence within a socialist system. The area chosen was near the Amur River, bordering China, with Birobidzhan as its center. The first settlers, mostly from Ukraine, Belarus and Russia, arrived that year. They faced difficult conditions, including a harsh climate and undeveloped land. Despite this, the population grew, and in 1934, this region was officially recognized as the Jewish Autonomous Oblast, with Yiddish as an official language alongside Russian. Today, it remains one of the few places in the world where Yiddish is officially recognized by the state. Highly educated and professionally advanced, today's Soviet Jews make a significant contribution to the nation's arts and sciences. Although an autonomous region was set aside for them in the Soviet Far East, nearly all Jews reside in the cities of the Western USSR. Once half the world's Jews lived in the Tsarist Empire, but wars, pogroms and forced movements have sharply reduced the population. Today, some Soviet Jews, like members of other minorities, seek more liberal immigration policies and greater rights within the USSR. Now we come to the mighty Uralic peoples shown under three divisions: Finno-Ugric and Samoyedic. The Ugric branch consists of the Hungarian, Khanty and Mansi peoples with populations of 170,000, 20,000 and 7,500 respectively. These groups lived quite far apart from each other, Hungarians mostly in Ukraine and Khanty and Mansi peoples in central USSR. The Finno branch had a much larger population: Estonians, Finns, Izor, Karelians, Komi, Komi-Permiaks, Lapps, Mari, Mordvins, Udmurts and Veps. You can see the central, southern and western USSR with a prominent Finnic presence, shown in violet. Estonians were the largest Finnic group, with just over 1 million people. Most lived in the Estonian Socialist Republic, but we can also see small Estonian communities in the deep Soviet south. Here and here. Coming back to the Uralic heartland, Finnish population was 77,000, Izor 748, Karelian 138,000, Komi 326,000, Komi-Permiak 150,000, Lapp 1800, Mari 621,000, Mordvin 1.2 million, Udmurt 713,000, and Veps 8,000. Let's take a quick detour here to talk about an interesting fact about the Udmurt people. They are known for having a higher occurrence of red hair than other groups. This unique feature has been noted since the 18th century, with some calling them the most red-headed people in the world. The Udmurt community celebrates this distinction through events like the Red Festival, held since 2004, highlighting red hair as part of their identity. The Samoyedic peoples, Nenets, Nganassans and Sakups, are spread over a large area, though their populations are small: Nenets 29,000, Nganassans 867 and Sakups 3,500. Traditionally nomadic reindeer herders, they lived in high tents called chums and speak languages named after them. Soviet policies forced many into collective farms, disrupting their way of life, but some communities still preserve their shamanistic beliefs, oral epics, and intricate fur and bead craftsmanship. And now, my friends, we're going to explore the final category of ethnic groups on this map: others. Although it is marked here, the Arab population in the USSR was almost non-existent, around 6,000 people. The only Arab-speaking pocket in the country was shown here, at the southern edge of Tajikistan. The Ainu ethnic group wasn't recorded in the 1979 census, but their presence is marked on this map on southern Sakhalin Island and two small islands eastward. In the Armenian Socialist Republic, there were around 25,000 Assyrians, whose descendants still live in Armenia today. Along the border between Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan, you will find the Dungan people, a Muslim community with roots in China. They are the descendants of Hui Muslims who escaped China in the 1800s during the Dungan Revolt and other uprisings. They speak Dungan, a language similar to Mandarin Chinese, and it's the only Sinitic language written in Cyrillic today. And the final, and perhaps the most interesting group in this video, the Koreans. Inhabiting primarily Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, the Soviet Koreans, also known as Koryo-Salam, are the descendants of Koreans deported to Central Asia from the Russian Far East in 1937 by Stalin. In addition to these areas, a small group of Koreans remain in the eastern part of the country, here on the map. The 1979 census recorded 388,000 Koreans. The diversity of the USSR is truly fascinating. All these people we have covered worked together in farms, factories, and government institutions and served in the same army. While they spoke Russian as lingua franca, many still managed to preserve their languages and heritage to this day. The world is full of fascinating cultural treasures, and it gives me such great pleasure to explore them with you. Well, my friends, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.